Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic and usually on location. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept. In this episode, we're talking about the way that the cloud has been transformed by enterprise IT. Before we begin, let's meet our panel today.
Hello, I'm Max Mortillaro. I'm co-owner and analyst at Tech Unplugged, and you can find me on Twitter at Dark Avenger.
My name is Adam Post. I'm an infrastructure architect, and you can find me on Twitter at semi_technical.
I'm Thom Greene. I'm the owner of GreenComp, and you can find me on Twitter at Tom Talks Tech.
And I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day and publisher of Gestalt IT. You can find me on most social media networks at sfoskett. For a long time, we've noticed that enterprise IT is adapting to the cloud and adopting cloud concepts and cloud technologies. But one of the things that we've noticed over the years with our Cloud Field Day events and the on-premise IT roundtable, including the Cloud Field Day event that happens just this week, is that the public cloud is changing too. In fact, a lot of enterprise IT concepts and focus on data and scalability and availability and data protection, all of these things are starting to become part of the public cloud experience too. So enterprise IT truly is transforming public cloud. Adam, I want to start with you because frankly, you're the one who pointed this out to me. What do you think? Is the enterprise changing the cloud?
Absolutely. I think cloud vendors had initially started from the premise that they started offering customers what they think they should have. And architecture in the cloud meant something different than it meant on premises. But now as the first movers that kind of align with that approach have kind of already transitioned to the cloud, they're left with this gigantic enterprise customer base that they need to still address. So now it seems like the change in direction has been, especially change in marketing and messaging from these cloud vendors is that they're trying to give the customer more of what they want, which is largely more of what they have, right? But they just want this somewhere else or delivered to them in a different way. I think that's what we're seeing with solution offerings like VMC on AWS. Pretty simple to spin up what is commonly referred to as a cloud environment, right? But it differs significantly from a traditional public cloud architecture in that things are accessed in a very similar way, and it is very simple to move your existing way of doing things into a new environment. So I think that is a primary driver for some of what we're talking about here in the enterprise changing how public cloud vendors are doing business.
Yeah, of course. And one thing which is interesting in what Adam was saying is that, there were first adopters which went the way those hyperscalers were kind of, advocating the right way to do IT in the cloud and so on. If you think about it, AWS was built primarily to serve Amazon purposes, which is not what every company in the world is doing. And there was this kind of initial, let's say, apprehension from organizations. Of course, there were people which were kind of thinking forward and were trying to adopt this kind of, cloud architectures and so on. But if you think about it, a lot of enterprises, a lot of organizations are pretty much conservative. They are using applications which we could qualify today as legacy or monolithic, and they have kind of a segmented approach to doing things. So they kind of want to have the ability to replicate the operational model that they have on premises, and that implies the fact that they will not always be adjusting or fine-tuning to cloud native way. Right, like running containers or doing serverless and so on. They have many applications, and refactoring those applications is a lot of effort. So there has to be a middle way where the cloud providers meet the enterprise.
Yeah, I definitely think that cloud is having to adapt to the remaining enterprises. A lot of applications that enterprise IT uses can't even be refactored into the cloud native DevOps lifecycling. Either the vendors that create them don't support that, or the code is so jumbled that the company owns it, but they don't necessarily know how to split it out, or it doesn't work correctly. And whenever you have that kind of an application that's very important to your business, you're not really going to want to spend the time to split it out if it's been working fine for 5-10 years. So I do think that a lot of the cloud options are coming in and adapting to that and helping a customer get that workload into their cloud with the way that they need it in order to be supported and also to run appropriately.
Yeah, I've heard that called inside out cloud computing. And they don't mean inside out, meaning reversed. They mean inside out, meaning taking what's running on the inside and running it on the outside. In other words, moving enterprise applications from the data center into the public cloud, as opposed to outside in, which maybe is the more visible aspect of cloud computing, which is where you take hyperscaler concepts, like I think Kubernetes is the poster child of it, and you bring those into the data center and into the enterprise, and you try to figure out ways of running things that used to be on the outside on the inside. And to me, when somebody explained that to me, it really kind of switched a light bulb on, because I realized that certainly outside in are the things that get all the attention in the press, but inside out is perhaps even more important, because if you can't run enterprise applications there, then it's not going to be adopted by the enterprise. I mean, they're really results oriented, right?
Yeah, the enterprise companies, they care more about being profitable and bringing profit to shareholders than they do about what cloud or what the deployment mechanism of their applications are. So if the vendors can't meet them where they want to be, can't help them meet their regulatory requirements with little friction, then they're not going to go do that. They're still going to maintain their own practices. So that's really a big shift, and really where I've seen a lot of growth in the past few years is the different vendors are doing that inside out. I really like that term, by the way. That's very appropriate, I think, for what is actually happening now as cloud is starting to mature.
Yeah, and there's another aspect to what you're saying, Tom, is that a lot of companies are trying to not just to be profitable, but to kind of grasp what can be reached, immediately. Kind of the low-hanging fruit, to use a buzzword. So they're really trying to figure out a way to get there without too much collateral damage, without too much investment. So really the quickest way forward to get in there without having to kind of re-architect all of their applications.
Yeah, and kind of adding on to that, it's like you were mentioning previously, Max, in that initial when cloud services were first offered, the initial barrier to entry was pretty idealistic, right? You needed a cloud center of excellence staffed by cloud experts. You needed to architect your applications properly in alignment with all of these core principles. But handling all of that on the front end, it slows you down, right? So it seems like things have, at the end of the day, the meter starts running as soon as your workloads start to hit AWS. And I think this is a real driver behind what we're seeing. The cloud companies are saying, okay, well, maybe we can compromise on some of these ideals on the front end. Maybe we'll stay engaged with the customer and iterate on this, and to see if we can gradually correct and bring things into alignment with that more ideal state as time goes along. So not only does that lower the barrier to entry on the customer side, it increases engagement over a longer period of time with the customer. And cynically speaking, it increases profit because it starts the clock for billing more immediately.
Being the devil's advocate, though, I wonder if a lot of these technologies that allow enterprises to use public cloud infrastructure, for example, without having to re-architect their environments, I wonder if that's actually detrimental, because they're not really getting the benefit of the cloud. I have sometimes used a derogatory term to describe that. I've said that it's a bridge to the past instead of a bridge to the future. In other words, we're trying to make sure that things that used to run still run, and kind of putting band-aids on it, putting it in a package, putting it in a virtual machine, and throwing that up in the public cloud, instead of saying, hey, let's actually transform these applications and make them run in the future infrastructure. I mean, make them cloud native. What do you guys think?
Well, if I can say a word on that, I think I absolutely agree what you're saying here. It seems that even the objectives of organizations are not that clear in there. So what is the driver behind that? Is that is that a financial matter? Is that a matter of ticking boxes in terms of goals? For example, if you think about it, going to the cloud can be a nice, let's say, way to do some kind of financial wizardry, right? You can move from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. You can, let's say, better make your balance sheet look better for investors, whatever, because you're just spreading things out. I mean, it really depends, because if you do your lift and shift operation badly, then it can really hurt your wallet. But there's also the idea of, okay, if you have a strategy which is we're going to move half of the workloads to the cloud, and all you really do is just I take my workloads and I just lift and shift them to the cloud, then you have not achieved anything. You're just moved them from one place to the other, but you're still bringing your kind of technical debt with you, because you still have to support the application as it is built, right? So you're not really making any kind of innovation. You've effectively moved workload from one place to the other, and you're, instead of paying upfront for whatever hardware or data center costs, you're just spreading them out.
Another thing, whenever you're talking about that, is you also have to consider the data that's involved and how you're going to manage that data. Because if you're just doing that lift and shift and the data is all within those virtual machines, you have to protect that in a different way than you might do it on premises. So you've got companies who are coming in and helping you with that, like disaster recovery, backing up the data. You've got the Zertos, even Kasten is doing it in Kubernetes. And the beginning of the cloud, when I was first starting to learn it 10 or more years ago, however long ago it was you kept your data in object storage and you took snapshots of volumes, and you didn't need a backup solution. But as it's coming along, the enterprise mindset of, well, I need to go back to this backup. I need this backup program to manage my data, for me. That's also come along with the whole package. So you've got that to contend with too whenever you're going up there. And how do you keep your data management cloud native, or do you even need to at this point?
So if you're just packaging up your technical debt and moving it into the future, then that's not really going to do it. And I think that for me, one of the things that's been most exciting in terms of seeing how enterprise is transforming the cloud is to see new services that are not a bridge to the past, but are actually a bridge to the future for enterprise applications. So you mentioned, for example, Kasten, which is basically data protection for Kubernetes workloads. And it basically is modern infrastructure, except with enterprise concepts behind it. And I think that for me is the thing that I'm looking out for. So let's talk a little bit more practical, like which, what products, what companies, what things or concepts are you excited about that are actually providing a new cloud service for the enterprise that are not just let's package up our technical debt and keep it running?
One of the things which is interesting with what you just described, and with the fact that the enterprise is somewhat transforming the cloud, I think that, in my view, the enterprise is not just bringing in, kind of tying the cloud to legacy things. I think it is bringing more maturity to the cloud. It is bringing the cloud to a level where the services provided are not just, here's a bunch of things for you techies to work with, but it is really bringing features which help organizations. If you think about it, tiering capabilities, the ability to have immutable snapshots, which help with data protection and so on. The fact that most of the major data protection companies now are offering enterprise-grade capabilities in the cloud and so on. I think that's really great. So it's not all about the enterprise bringing legacy alongside, but also about helping cloud providers to understand that organizations need high levels of availability, resiliency, and so on.
It's kind of a basic tenet, but I really liked seeing how you're bringing enterprise concepts like, say, a disaster recovery site, which used to be extremely expensive to build, and you can actually take that and it becomes a global option. Like if you want to be able to globally protect your data, protect your services, the cloud really brings that to the table. And then there's different ways that you can accomplish that, but it does allow you to modernize and procure that kind of protection, that kind of data services a lot more affordably. So I definitely think that that's a place where it's enabling people to think differently. You don't have to set up a whole infrastructure running warm. You can use it with the code. You can do it with like a a Zerto or something to protect that, to get that going, and it'll just spin up the infrastructure for you if you have it architected right. And that's a really good cost-saving driver to consider how to manage your enterprise applications as if they were cloud native.
Thinking back to part of our previous discussion, that we're talking about the enterprise changing how cloud providers are doing business, but it's not just a one-way change that is taking place here. So in attempting to tackle a transition that requires a lot of change, a lot of planning and strategy, like a transition to the cloud, it's almost forced a refresh and caused IT organizations to up their game as far as really identifying the value of their applications and data, and figuring out what should be placed in certain locations and why, and what are the roles and responsibilities and governance associated with the various systems that exist within the business. The whole cloud conversation has forced this to the front of their minds. So organizations that are attempting to do cloud, there's a secondary benefit in that the whole IT organization is benefiting from the difficulty of that pursuit, if that makes any sense.
If I can jump on that, what you're saying, Adam, here is that it's not just about the organizations, but it's also about IT departments and the people themselves. Because, before the cloud became mainstream, people were just living and managing their infrastructure the way it was always done. And suddenly the cloud started, picking up speed, and it was seen as a threat, right? So people were kind of seeing that, okay, my job can now be replaced by whatever operator which is running things at scale, and our IT department will be gone. And so people and organizations had somehow to reinvent themselves to be more competitive. So there is, as you said, this influx of innovation, which was that the organization needed to grab the context of how things are done in the cloud. But I think that it had also a very positive impact on the people themselves. People which suddenly, even you always had kind of people which were more proactive in doing trainings, in learning and upping their game. But for a vast majority of IT professionals, they were not caring. They were doing their job the way they've always done it. And suddenly there is this big menace here, which is, okay, if I don't adapt, I'm going to lose my job. And I think it was really something which kind of brought some fresh blood in the organizations.
And to continue on that, the fresh blood hasn't just happened in the IT organizations, it's happened in the product vendors and the cloud companies. And I think that, to me, that's one of the things that is really an interesting aspect here. Everywhere you look, from the big guys like AWS down to very, very popular true born in the cloud hyperscale companies like, for example, NGINX, who we're going to hear about at Cloud Field Day. They've brought in people who really know the enterprise, and they've had those people working on product management, product development, in order to develop truly cloud native products that are appealing and practical for enterprise users. And I think that really is an interesting angle as well. So the people have transformed the products and have transformed the cloud because they're enterprise people, because they're people that have a background in this stuff. And, we're seeing that, for example, with Morpheus data. Those folks came from enterprise tech, and now they're developing cloud native orchestration tools. To me, that's, I think, another way that the enterprise IT is transforming the cloud.
Yeah, you definitely see that. You see that with the different hiring practices of those. Whenever you have to follow kind of the money, I guess, but the enterprises, they need to have different ways to manage and to deploy their applications and what they're actually doing. So that's something that I've really noticed, is there's a lot of data services, there's a lot of compute services, and API was really the way to consume that. But now it seems like a lot of the API, a lot of the companies are developing plugins and easy to use graphical interfaces for people who aren't comfortable in the command line, or who can't just wrap their head around, enter code and get serve storage, or enter code and get 100 servers. So it's actually very nice for helping those people consume services and knowing that they're treating the enterprise like a first-class citizen and not, the word legacy has always had a negative connotation, but now the enterprise is being treated more, I don't want to say fairly, but they're being given more attention now than they ever have with the cloud.
AWS is a good example of this, how they have gradually, they started really with that pure cloud mentality, and really, I don't believe they would really address hybrid cloud as a thing for quite some time, right? And their messaging and their whole approach to offering these types of services to customers has completely changed. Foundational services that would be required for your typical enterprise, extending Active Directory into the cloud, hybrid DNS services, the addition of VMC on AWS. Now we have a common hypervisor platform across multiple locations. All of these, if we would have said, started talking about them maybe in 2016 or so, I'd be shocked to think that Amazon would be heading in this direction. But I think that just goes to support the overall point that, the enterprise is an untapped market. They need these types of services, and gradually these companies are responding to that kind of demand.
Well, how about one of the ultimate cases of this, of sort of cross-pollination between enterprise and cloud, and that is the person of Mr. Gelsinger over at Intel. I mean, here's somebody who absolutely has has switched between those places, right? And is trying to bring these concepts and bring these things together. Unlike, I think, almost anyone else in the industry in terms of executive leadership, at least, here's somebody who's really trying to stitch those two things together and build something enterprise, right? Between VMware and the thought that he was going to go over to Microsoft previously before that, and then he's back here at Intel. Intel, I guess, if it has success in the cloud, it would bring enterprise concepts, right?
Yeah, one thing on Intel, or rather on Pat Gelsinger, which is interesting, is that he's been there for such a long time at VMware, and you really had the opportunity to see the cloud grow and see that it's here to stay. If you look at the beginnings, with what was it called, VMware vCloud Air, or whatever was the name of the product, they saw that had no chance of sticking around. And the fact that he's been strategically working with AWS and other partners in expanding VMware services to the cloud, I think it has also given him a view of what the cloud holds and what's happening on the background of the cloud. And I'm thinking more about the hardware side of things, those accelerators, offload cards, the rise of new architectures, the fact that GPUs are kind of taking up as well for HPC and AI workloads. So I think that it had given him a clear idea of all that kind of Intel needs to catch up with to stay relevant and competitive in the years going forward.
It's interesting that you mentioned the accelerator cards, because of course those were pioneered in the cloud, but now they're become a thing in the enterprise, whether it's DPUs or the PlyOps storage accelerator, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at it, the way PlyOps are doing things, it's a solution which, of course, can be used on premises by organizations. But if you think about it, the way they've built and they've architected that thing, and sorry to digress a bit from what we're talking about, it's something which would perfectly well run in the cloud. So that also gives, enterprises, organizations, if they need to accelerate some workloads that they need to run in the enterprise, they should have in theory the ability to do the same in the cloud with using the same underlying hardware architecture.
Workload portability, right? That's a great point. And now that brings to mind something else I wanted to throw in. So what other change needs to happen? A lot of change has happened, but we still have some things that are pretty significant. You look at them and you're like, that's still a thing? Some licensing policies, right? It seems like there are still some companies, especially companies that are used to selling to the enterprise market who are very static in their thinking. They're used to that giant bag of cash being presented to them at the licensing renewal time. And if you, as the customer, decide you want to use their product, for one, if you still want to give them your business, but you just want to do it somewhere else in the cloud, that there's going to be some sort of odd penalty associated with doing that, like just because maybe a vCPU on-prem is licensed differently than a vCPU in the cloud. Looking at Oracle over here. So, any thoughts about changes like this that would we'd still like to see?
Yeah, if I can say a word again, I think the most important and the most exciting thing perhaps is around application refactoring, but it has one big problem, right? It costs money and it takes time, it's expensive, and the outcome is, my application is going to be more agile, I can release it in faster cycles and so on, but is it worth the effort of doing so? So that's the main challenge I see there with application refactoring. Otherwise, it opens the door of opportunities in doing things in a linear way and so on.
And something that I'm just curious, I know there's been a few start and stops on it, but is increasing availability on infrastructure. If you're using one of the native infrastructure tools, my VMware centric mind thinks, well, it should always be up, and if something fails, it needs to restart and this and that. But that is a cloud concept that I don't think is fully fleshed out unless you're on like a VMware platform on the different cloud providers, and then integrating it into different cloud services or for persistent data and relational databases. I think there's a lot of room for vendor applications to adopt that kind of architecture, because not every company owns the code for every app or is responsible for supporting the apps, even though those apps are making them money. So it's just really interesting to me that there's some very major applications that don't do support on cloud vendors.
So I think what you were just saying, Thom, kind of ties back into what I was talking about with the application refactoring, because one of the benefits of refactoring your application is that you're moving the availability and all of the data, let's say not protection, but the fact that the application is running up, all of these things, you're moving them up the stack from the infrastructure to the application level. And then, of course, you can benefit from all of the cloud capabilities, availability zones, regions, and all. And it just makes it way easier than to kind of manage your application, making sure that it stays always up. So you're really, then you get to the point where you can really cut down, let's say, the dependency you have on, let's say, legacy architectures on the infrastructure level.
So one other area I think that we've seen enterprise impact cloud is by, as we talked about earlier, kind of hardening cloud services and making them, frankly, better. And one of the greatest examples of that I've seen recently is this Hazelcast application, which was something that I wasn't all that familiar with, but I think that a lot of us are used to sort of scale out, NoSQL, eventually consistent databases, and we kind of look down at them because, oh, those things, they're useful for maybe a website or something, but not real data. And, here again, we've got a case where a company has brought in people with enterprise background and created sort of a supercharged version of that is more enterprise appropriate and appropriate for better applications. And there are so many ways that we're seeing that. The same thing with MinIO with their object storage platform, right? They've taken what was really kind of an oh yeah cloud storage and turned it into a really interesting storage platform for enterprise data. So it is just amazing to see across the board how much the enterprise has transformed the cloud even now. Before we finish up, I'll just give you guys a chance. Any last words on the way that enterprise is transforming the cloud? Let's start with you, Adam.
Yeah, and lastly, one of the big ways I've seen enterprise transform cloud is the seriousness with which data protection is approached. It used to be recommended that you take an EBS snapshot or you replicate your S3 bucket somewhere. And now they're seeming to take it much more seriously by developing dedicated services to meet those specific requirements of enterprises. AWS Backup comes to mind. Improving relationships with outside partners who want to add on to that functionality, Cast and Zerto, right? So I think that's an area where we're seeing a lot of change that will be ultimately beneficial to the enterprise.
Yeah, I think you can see very clearly where the enterprise has influenced cloud and the native services that are created for migrating the workloads. Migration, it sort of kind of does the lift and shift for you. It puts it into infrastructure containers for like Azure has their migration services, and it does the planner. It can really help you get your services into the cloud native space, which is interesting as a change of we'll do it for you because we know that it's hard, it's very expensive, and we want to help you ease your journey. So whenever you're looking at the migration tools and how it creates a nice landing zone for these services, you can tell that they're really putting a lot of the thought and effort into these services, making them ready for enterprise.
One thing which is interesting is that the cloud has been a space where you got the basic building blocks and you had someone to figure out a way, and that's something that most of the vendors have grasped really well, the fact that they've seen the gap that the public cloud had, kind of some, I wouldn't say some kind of gaps, or rather lacking areas, and they were able to use those building blocks to bring enterprise-grade features, capabilities. You're talking about security, you're talking about data protection, resiliency, and so on. And they really helped kind of facilitate the adoption of cloud by enterprises ultimately. So that's and really it's a good opportunity for them, for those which were able to see that opportunity, grasp it, and not let it pass through actually.
Yeah, and I think that it is pretty exciting to see this sort of co-evolution of the cloud with the enterprise tech world. And that's what we're going to be talking about this week at Cloud Field Day 11, and of course, all the time at Cloud Field Day, because that's really what Cloud Field Day is about. So before we go, I'll just give you a chance. Where can we connect with you and continue this conversation? Thom?
Sure, you can connect with me on Twitter at ThomTalksTech and on my blog at greencomp.com.
You can connect with me at semi_technical on Twitter, and semi-technical.com, which is my blog.
Yeah, and you can find me on Twitter at Dark Avenger with 2 Ks, and otherwise on our blog at techunplug.io/blog.
And as for me, you can find me here at gestaltit.com every week on the Utilizing AI podcast and the Gestalt IT Rundown, and alternating weeks here with the On-Premise IT Roundtable. So thank you very much for joining us and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do subscribe for future episodes, and also maybe share this with your friends and give us a rating or review on iTunes, since that does help. This podcast is brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.